Hey everyone, Coach Mike here, and welcome back to another episode of the Language of Leadership. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Gabe Karp. Now, Gabe, how are you doing today?
Great, Mike. How are you? Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be
Doing
here.
super well, thank you. Delighted to speak with you today about your book, Don't Get Mad at Penguins. And besides an awesome title and some amazing stories, there's some fantastic and useful tools and tactics and frameworks that I think everyone, whether it be parents, professionals, and teenagers, can use in our lives to address, manage, and leverage conflict effectively. Before we get into that, would love to hear a little bit more about your background. I know you began your career as a trial lawyer. You joined a startup company, grew that to be incredibly successful. You work in the investment industry now, sit on boards of companies, as well as now speak and write. But would love to hear it from you and just briefly introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I began my career a lawyer, a litigator, meaning the kind that was in court, 3-4 times a week, and that's pretty contentious work. I kind of had a front row seat to the conflicts of others, my clients, and trying to mix up that, stir it up, and then eventually resolve it. One of the areas of practice that my firm did and I was involved in was legal malpractice. So that means that we sued other lawyers for screwing up. So if you think a lawsuit is contentious, this is that on steroids. And it was great training. Like imagine cross-examining someone who cross-examines people for a living and who just like with a passion. And I learned a lot about anger and how to leverage anger in a conversation, how the energy flows in a room between people, and how that really impacts the relationships with everybody. And I needed to lead through that as part of my job and navigate those pretty rough waters as a very young professional. So that was kind of some of the formative years of my views on leadership and just managing things. And as you said, I joined a small startup, maybe about 20 people when I joined, and we grew it to about 500 people. And you necessarily make a lot of mistakes along the way, and great learning. Like making mistakes and learning from them has always been the most impactful to me, as opposed to doing something right the first time. You just don't give it much thought. But when you screw something up and then you pay the consequences for that, and then you say, okay, I never want to be in that situation again. So you really study it and understand. And I found that anytime I would look back 6 months or a year to take inventory of my time, I realized I was always gravitating towards conflict. Initially, as a lawyer, to instigate and stir up conflict, but then as a startup executive, and then more than a startup, having built and led a number of operational teams, seeking out conflict to just get rid of inefficiency, so we could grow the company faster and satisfy clients' needs and satisfy the needs of the people in our company in terms of their career aspirations and all of that. It's really a holistic view. And then we had a good exit there, and I've gone on into the world of venture capital, where we invest in startup companies, and I sit on a number of boards, and I work very closely with the CEOs, the founders of those, as they go through many of the same issues that I had to deal with early on. And the reality is I've been doing it a long time, and I've made a lot of mistakes. So that puts me in a position to say to a CEO, I did that and I messed it up. So don't do it the way I did it. Maybe you do it this way instead. And that's really valuable. That alone I think is very helpful to a CEO who just realizes how, at least not to waste time doing what I did. They're probably going to waste time doing something else, but at least they won't make the same mistakes I made.
Well, the learning from experience, it sounds like, really is a key theme and a core driver for you, whether you're a litigator or an executive and now an advisor, an investor, mentor to CEOs. You did just mention, I think, something that I think is really critical, which is the ability to share experiences with other people, the ability to look back on your own mistakes and reflect on your own mistakes. And there was one story that you shared in the book that maybe we can just use this as a starting point in terms of creating an environment of healthy conflict within an organization. One of the stories that really sits with me is that you told your team one day that we couldn't do something because of a Supreme Court case that you simply made up. And you were waiting for them to challenge you. And maybe at first they didn't, but then with a little bit of prodding and pushing, they did. And then something really important happened as a result. Could you walk us through that just as an intro to the general themes of Don't Get Mad at Penguins?
Yeah, sure. So just to provide context of the story, so the story has the context. I had built a legal team. Legal services was one of the deliverables that our company was giving, and I was being really efficient. So I was hiring, kids right out of college, non-lawyers, to do the work of lawyers, and they were intimidated by lawyers because they weren't, and the law had this mystic quality to it. There seemed to be this black box they couldn't see inside, and they needed to be able to have conversations with lawyers on the other side of a number of issues and have the confidence to know that what they were doing was right, and to be able to ask questions and to be able to challenge things. And in any kind of meeting, you often hear people in companies that try to create this culture of, oh yeah, here we can say anything to anybody. We're very open with each other, and they say that as a platitude of part of the culture. But when it gets down to it, that's a really hard thing to get people to really live up to. And I would tell the team, we'd have a weekly team meeting. We really need to be able to challenge one another, so that if something doesn't make sense to us, we ask about it. And everybody would nod their head and say, yes, 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 yes. And I just could tell there wasn't enough conflict in these meetings. And I knew we needed to have conflict in order to be able to get to the heart of issues. So one day someone asked a question. We were in the digital promotions space, by the way, just for context. So we would run these promotions for these major brands. 75 of the top 100 brands of the world were among our clients. So someone on the legal team said, hey, there's a client that wants to do this. Can we do legal issues? And I said, yeah, actually, that's illegal because the Supreme Court case of such and such and such, I made up, said that you can't do this. And then I said, and here's what happened in that case. And I just gave the most ridiculous set of facts. It was even hard for me to keep a straight face while I was saying it, but I kept a straight face, and they're all nodding their heads. And then I stopped and I said, okay, does that make sense to everyone? And, a number of them were saying, well, it actually doesn't make sense. In fact, it sounds kind of ridiculous. And I said, well, why didn't you challenge me on it? And they said, well, because you said it with such authority, we just assumed it had to be right. And I said, I completely made it up. You're absolutely right to think that it was ridiculous, because it is. And listen, we've got to challenge each other, and you can't let anyone get away with saying anything that doesn't make sense to you, including me. So once they realized that I was capable of just making stuff up in these meetings, it became a little bit of a game. So anytime I said something that didn't even make the slightest sense, they would challenge me. Now, it did get a little annoying because sometimes I'm saying true things that are legitimate, and they're challenging me on it. But that's a small price to pay to get that kind of culture. Because once they started challenging me, it was very easy for them to challenge each other, especially when I met to their challenge with total acceptance. I didn't beat anyone up for challenging me. I'm a skilled debater. And litigators, your goal is to like make your opponent look silly, because that just helps in the negotiation. I didn't do that. I mean, anytime someone challenged me, I thanked them for asking the question, and I engaged. And I said, you raise a great point. And in other words, I made it very comfortable and rewarding for them to challenge me. And then once they felt that, it kind of removed the stigma associated with initiating conflict. And then they just, after a while, no one could get away with saying anything that didn't make sense in that meeting. And it was great.
It is a tall order to have a recently graduated, college student or university student to challenge somebody who's a, high flying executive at one of these startups or these companies, or you yourself as a trained litigator. So I can imagine the initial hesitation or even trepidation that some of these young men and women felt. And I'm sure that came from somewhere, right? I don't think we're all born as our finished selves. We have influences with our lives, and maybe our parents and our teachers or something growing up. I know for me, I grew up in a household where my mother and my father never fought. And to this day, I always wonder, maybe that has influenced me to become a little bit more conflict avoidant. In the book, Gabe, you point out very clearly, we resist conflict because of nature and nurture. Can you walk us through what that division is, and maybe what influence both our physiology as well as our psychological surroundings and upbringings
Sure.
do to our opinion about conflict?
Yeah. And I mean, that is a critically important thing to understand if you want to really navigate through conflict, the origins of it. So for one thing, we're socialized from a young age to avoid conflict, to shy away from conflict. We soften bad news. We sugarcoat feedback. We're taught, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And those are all good lessons. What lessons also do is create this subconscious feeling that, okay, conflict is a bad thing. And it's not polite to confront someone. It's not polite to say something that's not nice. But the reality is, sometimes something that isn't nice also happens to be really important. A simple example I can give you is, let's say right before I came on your show right now, I was in the other room and I was talking to someone, and I had food in my teeth. I had spinach in my teeth. And the person didn't tell me, because they didn't want me to make me feel bad or embarrass me in the moment. And instead, they're going to let me go on your show onto a recorded podcast and have the spinach in my teeth visible to everyone. By the way, I should probably check if I have spinach in my teeth.
Yeah, by the way, I meant to tell you, Gabe, you got a little something right there.
So, I mean, listen, in the moment, it's really uncomfortable to tell somebody, hey, you got food in your teeth. But it's really cruel to not tell someone that if they're about to go in front of a large group of people. And that is a very small example, but it's sort of, we really are raised to not do that. And that can lead to unhealthy conflict, toxic conflict. The other piece is, as you mentioned, the nature part. So we've got over 1 billion years of evolution hard coded into our DNA. We've been bred to protect ourselves. We have something called an amygdala, actually 2 of them. It's a small gland on either side of the brain behind the optic nerve. And the amygdala is responsible for detecting threats and preparing the body for an emergency response. And when we perceive a threat, the amygdala sounds the alarm and prepares the body for fight or flight. You often hear about the fight or flight instinct. And stress hormones like adrenaline and flood our system. And we notice immediate changes, increased heart rate, sweaty palms. Our breathing gets rapid and shallow as we take in more oxygen, preparing to attack or run away if we have to. And those stress hormones cause other sensations like a quivering in our chest, limbs, or voice. And we can feel heat flush our face, our throat constrict, the back of our neck tighten, our jaw set. Like, we're in the grips of this highly efficient but prehistoric set of physiological responses. And they're not pleasant. They're not meant for relaxation. They're designed to move us to action. And the amygdala also shuts down the neural pathways to the part of our brain where complex decision making takes place, and we use reasoning and we think. So we lose access to that in this mode. And the best way to think about it is, hey, maybe an argument or a challenging conversation with someone, and you thought of the perfect thing to say, only you thought about it 2 hours after the conversation ended. That happens
Totally.
to almost
Totally can
everyone.
relate
And the
to that.
reason why is that you just didn't have access to that part of your brain in the heat of the moment. Our memory also becomes untrustworthy in the heat of the moment. And, the big give is, you've been in an argument with a friend or a loved one, and you literally can't remember one positive thing about this person. It's as if the brain dumped the memory function altogether just to survive the threat. And instead, we're just left with that flashing red light of the amygdala that says, like, danger, protect, danger, react, danger, attack. And we can't choose how we want to react because our genetically bred nervous system does it for us. And all this happens before consciously we even know what's going on. It is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing for humans. And, back when we lived in caves, or our ancestors lived in caves, and they walked out of the cave and saw a saber-toothed tiger, their amygdala kicked into high gear and protected them from the threat. Now, by the way, there were others at the time who had less active amygdala, and they walked out of a cave and said, oh, saber-toothed tiger, cool. Those were not our ancestors. The official scientific term for guys like that was lunch. But it's obviously, we've come a long way since our ancestors lived in caves, but that survival instinct is still very much intact. And when we're dealing with a difficult situation, our amygdala thinks we're still facing a saber-toothed tiger, not Shelley from accounting. So these are like, the deck is stacked against us to poorly manage conflict. Because, and by the way, when you're in the jungle or out on the savannah, that fight or flight instinct will save your life. But in business, in leadership, in the boardroom, in any situation where you're dealing with another person non-physically, the survival instinct drives a really poor use of conflict.
And I think that ties in really nicely, Gabe, to the 4 toxins that you then address and name as fear, anger, judgment, and ego. And in this segment of the book, one of my biggest takeaways was that we think that fear, anger, judgment, and ego are automatically bad things and that they should all be avoided. But in fact, it's more about managing and leveraging a polarity without fully eliminating them. Would it be possible just to get your take on this, the 4 toxins, and then we can move on and dive into the conflict tracks?
Sure, absolutely. So fear, anger, judgment, and ego are naturally occurring aspects of life. They are inevitable. So they cannot be avoided. They cannot be eliminated. And any effort in trying to avoid or eliminate them, by definition, is futile. You will fail. It won't work. And you'll spend a lot of energy in something that's not going to have any chance of success. It's important to appreciate that fear, anger, judgment, and ego in optimal ranges are actually really good for us. When I get angry about something, that motivates me to fix something that's broken. Like something's not working, I get frustrated, I get mad, and that gives me the drive to say, I want to go fix this. The key is, once I fix it, I need to let go of the anger and not continue to carry it with me, because if I continue to carry the anger after it has served its purpose, it does become toxic. Same ego. Ego will motivate us to stand up and to make sure that we get the credit that we're due, to make sure that we prevent someone else from taking credit for what we've done. It also helps our self-confidence. Too much ego, well, you kind of come off as a jerk. Fear there are certainly situations where fear is going to tell you, don't do what it is you want to do right now. Be afraid. If someone steals your parking space and you want to give that person a piece of your mind and you wait there, and then the guy gets out of his truck and he's 6'5" and he has "I've killed less" for tattooed on his chest, and
I'm running away.
That fear you feel, that's healthy. That's not toxic. That fear, but then when you let fear prevent you from doing things that, need to get done, well, that's toxic. And it's important to remember that all substances, like water, obviously water is a very beneficial substance for the human body. It makes up it's the greatest substance in our body. But too much water, you can get water poisoning. Too little water, you get dehydrated. So keep these things in their optimal range so that they don't get toxic.
Thank you. I think that really tees up then the bulk of the book, and I don't necessarily think we have time to go into hyper detail about the bully trap, the need to win trap, the avoidance trap, and the judgment trap. I also want people to pick up a copy of the book themselves, but if we could just get a quick intro into what the traps are generally, and then there are a few specific quotations I'd love you to comment on if we have time.
So the bully trap is really defined when bullying-like behavior has the unintended consequence of shutting someone else down, shutting down communication. This is not the bully on the playground who's someone's lunch money. That's not a trap. That's a bully who's doing exactly what they intend to do. I'm talking about a scenario where maybe we feel urgency, we feel stressed, and in communicating with someone else, our urgency and stress comes out as more like we're bullying. I mean, it's not a fun thing to realize, but sometimes we are perceived as a bully in someone else's eyes, and that's a trap. And when we're on the receiving end of it, we can also get pulled into the trap by someone else. That's bully trap. The need to win trap is kind of what it says. It's when the need to win for winning's sake overrides whatever our initial goal was to win this little contest in the first place. So I think the best example is a lawsuit. I'm a lawyer. We talk about lawsuits. People end up in court in a lawsuit because their differences without a lawsuit. And they said, well, I'm going to go sue this person and I'm going to win in court. And all this energy is put into gearing up for this big lawsuit. And you get really bought in and invested in winning. But then at some point along the way, an opportunity arises to resolve it because maybe the parties are worn out. They fought enough. For whatever it is, for whatever reason, someone is now willing to come to the table that wasn't willing to come to the table before. And the need to win trap will prevent people from capitalizing on that opportunity because I don't care about resolving this issue anymore. Now I just want to win. Well, the only reason why you wanted to win in the first place was that you wanted to resolve this dispute you had with this other person. And here, a great opportunity has presented itself that's much better than the lawsuit route. And you're going to pass that up because you have fallen into the need to win trap. Next would be the avoidance trap. This is a big one. You touched on it yourself. Conflict avoidance, as I said, before, conflict is inevitable in human interaction. So if you try to avoid it, what that usually means is that some small conflict that you're avoiding is going to be left alone and allowed to fester and grow into a much bigger conflict that's going to come back and bite you eventually. There's just no avoiding these things. So the avoidance trap is this justification in my mind. Well, I don't want it, deep down inside, you just don't want to deal with the conflict because it's uncomfortable and it's hard. But the avoidance trap will cause you to rationalize. Well, this will just resolve on its own. Or maybe you have a conflict with an individual. Maybe you're that person's leader and you need to give really harsh feedback, but it's uncomfortable. So you think to yourself, they'll eventually figure out what they need to do and fix it on their own. Or, and this is even worse, if they were a good team member, they would figure it out and they would fix it. And if they're not going to be able to figure that out, then I shouldn't have to do it for them. That can make, a leader justified in withholding feedback, like telling someone they have proverbial spinach in their teeth. That's the avoidance trap. Things can go south pretty badly there. And then the last one is the judgment trap. Humans are tribal in nature. We have preconceived notions about people. We judge them. That's no avoiding that. But when we allow our judgments about people to prevent us from maybe working with them to achieve a common goal, that's a form of the judgment trap. There's an example I use in the book it's a hypothetical about two scientists that are working on a cure for cancer. And one of the scientists learns that the other one is decking his wife. And the first scientist just disapproves of that. I'm like, God, I thought this was a good guy. And now I realize he's cheating on his wife. I don't want to work with him anymore. Well, as a result, he's going to not work with him, and then they're not going to cure cancer. Now, obviously, this is an extreme hypothetical, but it's to make the point. If the goal is to cure cancer, you shouldn't let judgment about someone's personal ethics that have nothing to do with the cancer research or even your relationship with the person affect it. Keep those judgments at bay. And if you don't keep them at bay, you have fallen into the judgment trap, and the judgment has become toxic, and bad things can happen.
And it's so easy, as you point out in the book, and even as you just remarked on, for us to fall into those traps, because unless we're aware that our amygdala might be playing tricks on us, or unless we're aware that the fear, anger, judgment, and ego are coming up or sneaking up, maybe our ego rises so high that the need to win, supersedes everything else in our reason. There was one quotation or one excerpt from the book that I want to touch on here, just a little bit of a deep dive, if you might, because I just thought this was such an amazing insight. It's catering to your own ego is costly, but catering to someone else's ego is free. Could you comment on this one, Gabe?
So I'm a lawyer by training. Lawyers notoriously have egos. So I've spent a lot of time in this arena, and yeah, precisely that. If my ego is driving a conflict and I cater to my own ego, I allow my ego to continue driving it, that's going to cost me because it blind me from a better solution. Maybe the best thing for everyone involved, including myself or the person I'm representing, my company or whatever it is, maybe I need to say to someone, you know what? I was wrong before. I said something that doesn't make sense, and I'm going to abandon that position because I was wrong. And just doing that can really open up opportunity for people to work together. So if I cater to my own ego, I'll never do that. And I say catering to someone else's ego is free. So my point is this: if you find yourself feeling the physiological effects of conflict, maybe the hair on the back of your neck stand up, or your breathing gets rapid and shallow, it's really helpful to stop and just take a quick little beat and say, is my ego driving this conflict? Is the other person's ego driving it instead? And if you do find that the other person's ego is driving the conflict, then I say feed that person's ego. It will cost you nothing. Recognize that person has a need to feel powerful. So tell them that they're powerful and respectfully ask that they not use their power to hurt you. And by giving them, it doesn't cost you anything. You're not going to be giving anything up in the negotiation. But what you are going to be doing is giving them the respect they need, giving them the self-esteem, and they're allowed to save face. And once you've satisfied that need for them, subconsciously they'll appreciate it, and they won't view you as a threat or someone that they view they need, someone that they have to prove their ego to. So that's going to make them less inclined to dig in their heels on a particular position. They've already proven they're powerful. You've already given that to them. So now, the truly powerful people, they're the ones who can have the luxury of being lenient or flexible. It's the person who doesn't have power that needs to feel rigid and flex up and show strength. So it's a great thing. I will tell you that I started to consciously think about that. There were moments I would catch myself dealing with another person that said, "Oh, I'm digging in on here because of my ego," and that's not good. And I was able to back up and back off that, and it changes the dynamic. It changes the energy flow in a conversation. It's just knowing it and recognizing it is an amazingly powerful tool.
It's a very compelling insight, and I think it also reminds me almost of some of Eastern philosophy of Taoism to an extent, or some tenets of other Eastern koans or religions, where the more flexible, the more agile, the more mobile party is actually the one who is stronger, even though at the moment it appears as though they're yielding. It's actually that one who is creating a better outcome for the system. So it's an interesting insight there.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
I don't want to give our audience or listeners an impression that immediately upon reading the book they will never have conflict in their life again. I think you make this point pretty clearly in the book too. Again, that conflict is a healthy part of relationships, and that conflict is actually a critical part of having a healthy relationship. Wondering if you'd be able to just share maybe one experience that you've had with family members or friends about how you've been able to manage and leverage conflict to actually improve a relationship over time.
Yeah. I mean, I'll preface it by saying I believe strongly, and it comes out in the book, not only should you not avoid conflict or try to eliminate it, you should actually seek out conflict as an opportunity to strengthen a relationship. And if you think about anytime you achieve something worthwhile, you feel that you went through some real personal growth or professional growth, or strength that you did all that in the midst of conflict and navigating it. And without experiencing that conflict, you wouldn't have achieved that growth. I have I have a good friend who shall remain nameless. He's not here to approve of me talking about this, so I'll keep it a little general. We had been friends for a long time, and there were some things I was engaging in, some behaviors that I was unaware of that made this person feel slighted. And this was a good friend of mine, and I love this person, and I never intended for this person to feel slighted, but I was in fact doing things that, and now that I have a hindsight, saw that I was there were times when I could have been more accommodating and more respectful and more compassionate to this person. And he didn't bring it up to me for a long time. And as a result, we started to drift. I started to feel some distance between us. And I felt bad about it, and the thing is, when that happens, it happens slowly. It's not like one day, all of a sudden it happens. It's sort of like one day you kind of realize, wow, we really haven't spent as much time together as we have in the past. And I really enjoyed this guy's company. And I had already set on this path of exploring conflict and engaging in conflict. So I went to him and I said, hey, what's going on? Like, how do, I just want to let you know that I feel that we're not as close as we used to be. And I miss that. And I wish we could be closer, and, let's hang out more. And is there anything, and I started digging, is there anything that's going on? And through some coaxing, he didn't want to have the uncomfortable conversation. I drew it out of him, and he brought up some things that I had done, and he was really reluctant to do it because, the other thing is when you start to bring up individual things, they, in and of themselves, they're not that significant. So it kind of feels like he kind of felt like he was nitpicking and being petty, and that he was making a bigger deal out of this one thing. It would appear that he was making a big deal out of one thing, and that I would not respect that or appreciate that. And at first, when he first started talking, I did kind of think, wow, you're kind of overreacting there. But once he kept going and I could see the breadth of the things that I was doing, and saw how they all fit together and created a much bigger picture, I got it and I understood it. And I said, I'm sorry. You're right. I did not intend, like, the intent was not there, but I absolutely see how objectively it appears that way. And please understand, this is why I did this, and this is why I did that. And these aren't excuses. They're merely explanations. There is no excuse. What I did was wrong, and I owe you an apology, and forgive me. And he was like so grateful that we had that conversation. And so am I, because it totally opened up these issues. It got them, it aired them, it gave them the oxygen they needed to sort of live out their lifestyle. And our relationship is so much stronger as a result of that. And anytime here I do something that maybe might rub the other person the wrong way, we just bring it up immediately. And it's like, it's dealt with in a matter of seconds, not months or years. And I'm really, to this day, this is a person I've been friends with since we were little kids. And it, really important relationship to me. And I value it so much. And that's an example of really embracing the conflict and making a relationship stronger.
Thank you for sharing that, Gabe. I know that's a very personal example, but I think it really makes your work in the book and your commitment to making sure that we manage conflict effectively and embrace conflict so visual and visible. It probably would have been really easy to just avoid it, and to fall into the avoidance trap. Or it would have been easy at that moment when your friend was bringing up those things to say, well, hey, that wasn't me. That wasn't my intention. The need to win trap or others. So I think that's a textbook example for us to think about and reflect on, because I think if we're all honest with ourselves, that happens in all of our lives. We have relationships where we want to manage or we want to improve, but then for whatever reason, we haven't been able to do that effectively. We probably don't want to admit it, but 9 times out of 10, it's probably actions that we've taken or not taken, or things that we've said or didn't say. I'm sure someone out there has a friend who truly is a wild, crazy, bad person. But for most of us, I think if we're honest, it's probably things that we're doing. So it's a very helpful framework and example to make that come to life.
I would
I
just
know
add,
you have. Go ahead.
my ego almost stopped me from dealing with it, because in the beginning of that journey, my thought was, well, all right, I guess he doesn't like me that much anymore. Well, that's his problem, not mine. I'm not going to go, try to get someone who doesn't like me to like me again. Like, my ego was stopping me. But what was stronger than my ego was I really missed the relationship that we used to have, and the pain of missing that was able to push me over the edge to go have the uncomfortable conversation. Ego was going to block me there.
Yeah. I know our listeners have been wondering this whole time. So Mike, Gabe, why is the book called Don't Get Mad at Penguins?
Sure.
Can you share with us why?
There's a quote in the book that between expectation and reality is a space filled with suffering and conflict. And the wider that space becomes, the greater our suffering is. And the penguin analogy is really a lesson in acceptance. We should accept people with all of their limitations, and not expect them to do things that they're not capable of, even though we may really, really want them to. It may be really important to us that they do the thing they're not capable of, but they're not capable of it. And one of the real with this is that it's oftentimes really hard to see someone's limitations, especially if everything else about them suggests that they're not limited. So take a penguin, for example. What do you mean a penguin can't fly? It's a bird. It's got wings, it's got feathers, and birds with wings and feathers can fly, except that penguins can't. Flight is simply beyond their ability. And we can choose to get mad at that, or we can accept it. And you can apply that analogy to any human dynamic. And there are so many times, and I enter people and I talk to people about, they come to me and say, I've been having this recurring conflict with this other person. And they'll usually lay out a story where they get frustrated kind of at the same point in every interaction. And it has become a pattern. And it's obvious to me that the person they're dealing with isn't capable of behaving how they want them to behave. And they often, and I say that, this person, like, you want this person to do this in this situation, but this person doesn't even realize that that's what you want them to do. And this person's not capable of being that way. Maybe that person, they've got a big ego and they can't get over their own ego. And it's hard to talk about this without real detailed facts, but I would say this: oftentimes people will respond to that by saying, no, they know exactly what they're doing. I know they know because I know they're very smart. In fact, this person's very witty. He's real quick on his feet. So he has awareness. And anybody who's has that level is obviously going to see this other thing also. But that's the mistake. Because I tell people, listen, you're getting frustrated and angry at this person because you believe they're making a choice to behave this way, that they're doing it on purpose to make you upset. And that's just not what's going on here. They don't realize it. They don't want to be in this conflict any more than you do, yet they keep winding up in the same place with you. Boys, they just can't help it. And you can choose to get mad at that, or you can accept it. That's kind of the lesson. Because the title of that chapter is Don't Get Mad at Penguins Because They Can't Fly. A lot of times it's not the individual's limitation. It also might just be the limitation of a relationship. Maybe the person is fine and they don't have a limitation in and of themselves, but because you've been in a relationship with this person for a long time and you have these patterns of behavior that are really hard to break, that the relationship itself, it has the limit. So if you can recognize that and accept it, then you can move past it.
I think that feeling of tolerance and just acceptance and awareness of what someone is capable and what someone is less capable of doing is a great way to end on I think, Gabe, because it allows us to recognize that we do want to embrace conflict, we want to seek it, and at the end of the day, we can do our best to manage and leverage that ourselves, but we're unlikely to be able to really change the inner nature of somebody else. And we just have to be aware of that, respect it, be tolerant, give them the space and grace that they need. And then ultimately, I think over time, we probably gravitate towards working with people or loving people or enjoying company with people who we can have that sense of healthy conflict with. And if we can't, then maybe in the long run, that isn't a good relationship for us. But if we can, and I hope we all can, then I think that that's a great place for us to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
the key is to recognize it's a choice.
there you are. Well, thanks so much, Gabe. Really appreciate your time. I know we went a little bit over time today, so thank you for sticking with us. Where can we go to find out more about your work? I know that your website and everything we can link down below, but go ahead and let us know where we can follow you.
Sure. GabeKarp.com is at there. You'll have all the links. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm doing a little bit on Instagram and Twitter, starting to do more. But yeah, check it out. Check out the book. It's available everywhere books. There is an audiobook as well, narrated by me, if reading isn't your thing. So yeah, I'm just passionate about this stuff and love sharing the message.
Thanks so much, Gabe. Really appreciate it. And also, I think your audiences for your upcoming speaking tour are going to be very lucky to hear this. It's an incredibly powerful message and one that I think we all can do a more thoughtful job of thinking about on a daily basis, whether we're parents or students or our professionals, colleagues, and everything. So really appreciate your time. Thank you, Gabe.
Great. Thanks, Mike. It's been great. Thank you for having me.
All right.